The kingdom of Eldoria and the lost bloodline in the heart of the world, where the rivers sang ancient songs and the mountains stood as silent sentinels, once flourished the kingdom of Eldoria. A realm of splendor and power, Eldoria was ruled by a royal bloodline whose legacy was woven into the very fabric of the land. For centuries, the kings and queens of Eldoria were revered as divine rulers, their reigns marked by wisdom, justice, and an unshakable bond with the people. The kingdom thrived, its cities gleaming with golden spires and its fields bountiful with harvests. Eldoria's influence stretched across the known lands, its banners flying over distant lands, and its name whispered in awe by those who had never set foot within its borders. Yet, as with all great things, Eldoria's golden age was not eternal. A time of darkness came upon the kingdom, a period of war and betrayal that would leave its mark upon the land for generations. The royal bloodline, once the heart of Eldoria, was shattered by treachery and bloodshed. The last known heir to the throne, a young prince whose name had long been lost to time, vanished in the chaos that followed the kingdom's fall. Some say he was slain in battle, others whisper of his exile to lands beyond the known world. Whatever the truth, the royal line of Eldoria was lost, and with it, the kingdom's once great power faded into legend. In the centuries that followed, Eldoria became a shadow of its former self. The once mighty capital Ardenthal stood in ruins, its once glorious halls now overgrown with ivy and its streets silent save for the wind that howled through the empty corridors. The people who had once lived in prosperity now toiled in hardship, their lives dictated by the remnants of a broken kingdom. The name of Eldoria was still spoken, but not with the reverence it once commanded. Instead, it was a tale of sorrow, a reminder of what had been lost and what could never be reclaimed. Yet even in the deepest shadows, hope lingers. Among the scattered remnants of Eldoria's people, there are whispers of an ancient prophecy, a tale passed down through generations. It speaks of a time when the lost bloodline would return, when the last heir of Eldoria would rise to reclaim the throne and restore the kingdom to its former glory. Some dismiss it as mere fantasy, a desperate dream of those who long for a past that can never be. Others, however, believe that the prophecy holds truth, that the lost heir still walks among them, waiting for the moment when destiny will call him or her forth. As the wind carried the scent of old stone and the echoes of forgotten songs, the world of Eldoria stood on the precipice of change. The kingdom may have fallen, but its legacy endured, and the mystery of its lost bloodline remained. It was in this world, in this time of uncertainty and hope, that the story of the lost royalty would once again begin. The heir of Eldoria, in the quiet village of Elthar, nestled in the shadow of the ruined city of Ardenthal, lived a young woman named Elyria. Born to a family of scholars and scribes, she had spent her life poring over when steges, enges, neges, and a time of uncertainty and hope that the story of the lost royalty would once again begin. Ancient texts and forgotten histories, her mind a vast repository of knowledge that few could rival. Though she had never set foot in the grand halls of Eldoria, the stories of her ancestors had been passed down through generations, woven into the fabric of her very being. Her grandmother, an elder historian, had once whispered to her of a prophecy, a tale of a lost heir who would one day rise to reclaim the throne and restore Eldoria to its former glory. At the time, Elyria had dismissed it as nothing more than a tale meant to inspire hope in a world that had long since forgotten its past. But now, as the weight of destiny pressed upon her, she could no longer ignore the truth. Elyria was not merely a scholar, she was a seeker of forgotten knowledge, which weighed as no long gyre, a proffer. A woman who had dedicated her life to uncovering the mysteries of Eldoria's past. She had spent years deciphering ancient scrolls, tracing the lineage of the royal bloodline through the remnants of history. It was through these studies that she had discovered a startling revelation, one that had been hidden for centuries. The lost heir of Eldoria was not a distant myth, nor was it a mere legend passed down by dreamers. The heir was real, and she was the last known descendant of the royal line. The revelation had shaken her to her core. For years she had believed herself to be an ordinary woman, a mere scholar in a world that had long since moved on from the glory of Eldoria. But now she saw the truth in the lines of her own face, in the deep-set eyes that mirrored those of the ancient kings and queens. The blood of Eldoria ran through her veins, and with it came a burden she had never wished to bear. The prophecy had spoken of a time when the heir would rise, when the lost bloodline would return and reclaim the throne. But was she ready for such a fate? Could she bear the weight of a kingdom that had long since fallen? Doubt gnawed at her, but so too did the fire of purpose. She had spent her life searching for answers, and now that she had found them, she could not turn away. The world of Eldoria had been broken, its people lost in the shadows of a forgotten past. But perhaps, in her, the kingdom's hope still lived. She would not be the first to carry the burden of the lost heir, nor would she be the last. But she would be the one who would rise, who would seek out the truth and face the trials that lay ahead. With her heart heavy and her mind resolute, Elyria knew that her journey had only just begun. The path before her was uncertain, fraught with danger and mystery. Yet, as she stood at the edge of the unknown, she felt the stirrings of something greater than herself. The prophecy had called her, and she would answer. Allies and adversaries. Elyria could not face the trials ahead alone. The path to restoring Eldoria would be long and treacherous, and she would need those who could stand beside her, those who would fight for the kingdom even when the weight of history bore down upon them. Among them was Kaelin, a warrior of unmatched skill and unwavering loyalty. Once a captain in the fallen kingdom's army, Kaelin had spent years wandering the world, his blade tempered by the battles he had fought and the oaths he had sworn. Though the kingdom had crumbled, his faith in its cause had never wavered. When he learned of Elyria's lineage, he saw in her the last spark of Eldoria's lost fire, and he vowed to fight for her as he had for the king who had once led him. His presence was a bulwark against the darkness, his sword a beacon of hope in the face of uncertainty. But Kaelin was not the only one who had felt the call of Eldoria's fate. Mira, a sorceress of the Veilborn, had long studied the ancient magics that had once bound the kingdom to the land itself. The Veilborn were an enigmatic order of mystics, their knowledge of the arcane passed down through generations. Mira had once been a scholar in the ruins of Ardenthal, searching for the lost secrets of Eldoria's power. It was there, among the crumbling halls of forgotten kings, that she had first encountered Elyria. At first she had been wary of the young woman, for the prophecy that spoke of the heir's return had been a tale whispered in the halls of the Veilborn for centuries. But as she studied Elyria, she saw something in her eyes, something that mirrored the ancient texts she had spent her life deciphering. It was not just destiny that had brought them together, but a deeper, older force that had been waiting for the heir to return. Then there was Lyrian, a scholar and historian who had spent his life unraveling the mysteries of Eldoria's past. Unlike the others, he did not fight with steel or magic, but with knowledge. He had been one of the few who had believed in the prophecy long before Elyria had discovered her own lineage. His books, filled with the chronicles of Eldoria's rise and fall, had been the foundation upon which Elyria had built her understanding of the world. Now he would serve as her guide, his wisdom a beacon in the darkness. Together they formed a bond that would carry them through the trials ahead. Kaelin would fight with his blade, Mira with her magic, and Lyrian with his knowledge. Elyria, though untested in battle, would be the heart of their cause, the one who would lead them toward the truth of Eldoria's lost bloodline. They were not just allies, they were the last remnants of a kingdom that had once stood as the greatest power in the world, and now, with the heir at their side, they would stand once more. The journey begins. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Elyria and her companions set forth from Aelthar, their path winding through the ruins of the fallen kingdom. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had no choice but to press on. The weight of Eldoria's past rested upon their shoulders, and the fate of the kingdom depended on the journey they were about to undertake. With Kaelin at her side, his sword strapped to his back, Mira's staff glowing faintly with the magic of the Veilborn, and Lyrian poring over ancient texts, they made their way toward the first destination on their map, a forgotten temple said to hold the key to the lost bloodline. Their first challenge came not long after they had left the village behind. The path through the old kingdom was treacherous, the land scarred by centuries of war and neglect. The once thriving roads had crumbled into a maze of broken stone and overgrown paths, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was not long before they encountered their first obstacle, a crumbling bridge that spanned a deep chasm, its wooden planks long since rotted away. Kaelin studied the structure with a critical eye, his fingers tracing the splintered wood. "We can't cross that," he said, his voice low. "It's too unstable." Mira stepped forward, her eyes scanning the chasm. "There's another way," she murmured. "A hidden path through the forest." She turned to Elyria, her expression unreadable. "If we go that way, we'll be walking through the corrupted lands." Elyria hesitated. She had heard the stories of the corrupted lands, of the twisted trees that whispered in the language of the dead, of the creatures that had once been men but now roamed the forest like shadows. It was said that the corruption had spread from the heart of Eldoria, a remnant of the kingdom's fall. "If we take the bridge, we risk falling to our deaths," she said. "If we take the bridge, we risk falling to our deaths," she said. "If we go through the forest, we risk something worse." Kaelin exhaled sharply. "Then we take the bridge." He turned to the others, his voice firm. "We can't let fear dictate our choices." Wood groaned beneath their weight, each step a test of their resolve. Lyrian's voice was steady as he recited the words of an old song, a chant meant to ward off the spirits that lurked in the ruins. Mira's staff pulsed with a soft glow, its magic reinforcing the fragile structure. They crossed the bridge in silence, the only sound the creaking of the wood and the distant howl of the wind. When they reached the other side, they found themselves at the edge of the corrupted forest. The trees loomed above them, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the ground was littered with the remnants of a forgotten war-broken weapons, rusted armor, and bones that had long since been claimed by the earth. As they stepped into the forest, the weight of the past pressed upon them. The trees whispered in voices they could not understand, and the shadows moved in ways that defied the natural order. Elyria felt a chill run through her, a sense of being watched. Kaelin's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the darkness. "This place is cursed," Lyrian murmured. "The corruption here is older than any of us." Mira's expression was grim. "Then we must be careful. The past is not always willing to let go." Elyria tightened her grip on her satchel, the weight of the prophecy pressing upon her. They had only just begun their journey, and already the shadows of Eldoria's fall had begun to rise. The path ahead would be long, and the trials they would face would test them. In ways they had yet to imagine, but they had no choice but to press on. The fate of Eldoria depended on it, the shadow of the forgotten king. As the group ventured deeper into the corrupted forest, the air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay and something more sinister. The trees, twisted and gnarled, seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the light of the sun. The whispers of the forest grew louder, no longer mere murmurs, but voices filled with anger and despair. Elyria felt a cold shiver run through her as the shadows around them seemed to shift, as if something unseen was watching their every move. Kaelin's hand never left the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning the darkness with a warrior's vigilance. "We need to." "Move faster," he said, his voice low but firm. "This place is not safe!" Mira stepped forward, her staff glowing faintly as she extended it toward the trees. "Something is here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something ancient." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of something massive moving through the underbrush. The group froze, their breaths shallow as the shadows seemed to coalesce into a shape that was neither man nor beast. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood that seemed to drink in the light. The figure's presence was oppressive, the air around it thick with an energy that made the very ground feel unstable. When it finally spoke, its voice was like the grinding of stone, a sound that carried the weight of centuries. "You should not be here," the figure said, its tone both a command and a warning. "This place is not for the living." Elyria stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "We are not here to harm you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overtake her. "We are seeking the truth of Eldoria's past." The figure tilted its head as if considering her words. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised its hand, and the shadows around them deepened. "The truth of Eldoria's past is not something that can be reclaimed," it said. "It is a burden that has been lost for good." Kaelin's grip on his sword tightened. "You are seeking the truth of Eldoria's past." The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised its Kaelin's grip. "Only one who remembers the past," he said, his voice filled with the unshakable resolve of a warrior who had fought for a kingdom that no longer existed. "The heir of Eldoria has returned, and we will not be stopped." The figure let out a low, guttural laugh, the sound sending a chill through the group. "The heir of Eldoria?" it said, the words dripping with mockery. "You mistake yourself, child. The heir is not the one who walks among you. The heir is the one who was lost, the one who was betrayed." Illyria's breath caught in her throat as the words struck her like a blow. She had spent years searching for the truth of the lost bloodline. But now, standing before this figure, she felt the weight of the prophecy pressing down on her like never before. The figure took a step forward, its presence radiating a power that was both ancient and terrifying. "You think you can restore Eldoria?" it said, its voice rising with a fury that seemed to shake the very ground. "You think you can undo what was done? The kingdom fell not because of fate, but because of betrayal. The royal bloodline was not lost, it was destroyed. And I am the one who ensured that it would never rise again." Mira's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her staff glowing brighter. "You are not the forgotten king," she said, her voice steady. "You are a shadow of the past, a remnant of the corruption that consumed Eldoria." The figure's laughter was like the sound of a storm, a force of nature that could not be stopped. "You think you can restore that it would never rise again." Mira's eyes smiled. "A wrong, sorceress," it said. "I am the king who was cast out, the one who was betrayed by those who claimed to serve me, and now I will ensure that no one else will ever rise to claim the throne." With a sudden violent motion, the figure raised its hands, and the shadows around them surged forward, a wave of darkness that threatened to consume them all. Kaelin moved to block the attack, his sword flashing as he met the shadow with a force that sent a shockwave through the forest that sent a shockwave through the forest. Elyria felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the realization that they were not just facing an enemy, they were facing the embodiment of Eldoria's fall, and if they failed, the kingdom would remain lost forever. The revelation in the ruins. The battle with the Forgotten King had left the group shaken, but it had also revealed a truth they could no longer ignore. The forest had not only tested their strength, but it also forced them to confront the deeper mysteries of Eldoria's past. As they pressed on, the ruins of an ancient temple loomed ahead, its once majestic stone facade now weathered by time and the relentless passage of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the faint echo of voices long since silenced. It was here, in the heart of the temple, that Elyria would uncover the final piece of the prophecy. With Kaelin at her side, Mira guiding their path with her magic, and Lyrian deciphering the inscriptions that lined the temple's walls, they stepped cautiously into the chamber that lay at the temple's core. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness, and the walls were covered in intricate carvings that told the story of Eldoria's rise and fall. At the center of the chamber stood an ancient pedestal, upon which rested a single weathered tome bound in dark leather. Illyria's heart pounded as she approached it, her fingers trembling as she reached for the book. As she opened the tome, the words on the pages seemed to shift, as if they were alive. They spoke of the royal bloodline, of the prophecy that had foretold the return of the heir, and of the betrayal that had led to Eldoria's fall. But what struck Elyria most was the revelation that the lost bloodline had not been destroyed. It had been hidden. The royal line had not vanished into obscurity, but had instead been concealed by those who had sought to protect it from the forces that had sought to claim the throne for themselves. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the final passage, a passage that spoke of the heir's true lineage. The bloodline of Eldoria had not been lost to history. It had been passed down through generations, hidden in plain sight. And she, Elyria, was not only the last known descendant of the royal family, she was the one who had been chosen to carry the legacy forward. The weight of the revelation settled upon her like a stone, pressing down on her chest. She had spent her life searching for the truth, believing that the prophecy was a tale of hope and destiny. But now, as she stood in the heart of the temple, she understood the true magnitude of what had been placed upon her shoulders. She was not merely the heir of Eldoria, she was the last hope of a kingdom that had long since fallen. Kaelin's voice was steady as he stepped beside her. "You found it, haven't you?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Elyria nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've found the truth." Mira's expression was unreadable as she studied the tome. "This changes everything," she said. "If the bloodline was hidden, then someone knew. Someone protected it." Lyrian, who had been silent for the longest time, finally spoke. "This means that the prophecy was not just a warning, it was a promise. That the heir would return, and that Eldoria would rise again." Elyria felt the fire of determination reignite within her. She had spent years searching for the truth, and now that she had found it, she could not turn back. The prophecy had called her, and she would answer. But as she looked at her companions, she knew that the journey ahead would be more difficult than she had ever imagined. The fate of Eldoria was not just in her hands. It was in the hands of all who had chosen to stand with her. And now, with the truth of the lost bloodline revealed, the path to restoring Eldoria had only just begun. The reckoning at the heart of the ruins. The temple trembled as Elyria and her companions stood at the threshold of the final confrontation. The air was thick with the weight of history, the echoes of Eldoria's past pressing upon them like an unrelenting tide. The Forgotten King had not yet revealed himself in full, but the shadows that surrounded him pulsed with an unnatural energy, as if the very land itself recoiled from the presence of the heir. Elyria tightened her grip on the tome, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the time for hesitation was over. Kaelin stepped forward, his sword drawn, his eyes locked on the darkness that coiled around the temple's entrance. "This is the moment," he said, his voice steady despite the storm that threatened to break upon them. "We stand for Eldoria, and we will not be stopped!" A low, guttural laugh rippled through the air, sending a shiver down Illyria's spine. "You think you can stand against me?" The Forgotten King's voice boomed, echoing through the ruins like the tolling of a great bell. "You think you can undo what was done?" The shadows surged forward, coalescing into a monstrous form that loomed over them. The Forgotten King was no longer just a whisper in the dark. He was a force of nature, a remnant of Eldoria's fall given shape. His form was twisted, his body a mass of shifting darkness and ancient stone, his eyes burning with the fury of a kingdom that had been betrayed. Elyria felt the weight of the prophecy pressing upon her, the words of the tome burning in her mind. She had come seeking the truth, and now, standing before the one who had ensured the bloodline's destruction, she understood the full measure of her burden. This was not just a battle for Eldoria's past, it was a battle for its future. Kaelin moved first, his blade flashing as he struck at the shadows. The Forgotten King's form twisted and reformed, his attacks deflecting with an ease that defied the laws of nature. Mira's staff flared with a brilliant light, her magic weaving through the air as she countered the king's assault with spells that crackled with raw power. Lyrian stood at Elyria's side, his voice steady as he recited the words of an ancient incantation, the magic of the Veilborn reinforcing the group's strength. But the Forgotten King was not merely a warrior. He was the embodiment of Eldoria's fall, a force that had been shaped by centuries of betrayal and sorrow. His power was vast, his will unshakable. He moved with the weight of the past, his strikes carrying the fury of a kingdom that had been lost. Elyria felt the prophecy stir within. Her, the words of the tome no longer just ink on parchment, but a force that surged through her veins. She had not come to fight with steel or magic alone. She had come as the heir of Eldoria, the one who would restore the kingdom's legacy. With a cry that echoed through the ruins, she stepped forward, the tome in her hands. "You were not the king of Eldoria," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of one who had finally found her place in the world. "You were the one who betrayed the throne, who allowed the kingdom to fall. But the bloodline has returned, and with it, the prophecy has come to pass." The Forgotten King let out a roar of fury, his form shifting as the power of the prophecy clashed against his own. She had not come to fight with stubble as Arn, with the authority of one who had finally found her place in the world. "You were my Dean." The ruins trembled as the battle reached its climax, the fate of Eldoria hanging in the balance, the dawn of a new era. The battle had ended, but the echoes of its fury still lingered in the air. The Forgotten King had been vanquished, his form dissolving into the shadows that had once bound him to the ruins. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and with it, the legacy of Eldoria had been restored. As the last remnants of the battle faded, the ruins of the temple stood in solemn silence, the weight of history pressing upon the land once more. Elyria stood at the heart of the chamber, the tome still clutched in her hands. The words that had once been a mystery to her now burned in her mind, the truth that had been waiting for her. All along, she was the heir of Eldoria, the one who had been chosen to reclaim the throne and restore the kingdom to its former glory. The past had not been lost, it had merely been waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Kalen, his sword still in hand, exhaled a slow breath as he surveyed the battlefield. "It's over," he said, his voice steadied. "The king is gone, and the prophecy has been fulfilled." Mira stepped beside Elyria, her eyes reflecting the glow of the magic that still lingered in the air. "Eldoria will rise again," she said. "The bloodline has returned, and with it, the kingdom's future is no longer in the hands of the past." Lyrian, who had remained silent for much of the battle, finally spoke. The history of Eldoria was not just a tale of loss. It was a story of resilience, of a people who refused to be forgotten, and now, with the heir at the heart of the kingdom, that story will be rewritten. Elyria looked around at her companions, the weight of the moment settling upon her. She had spent her life searching for the truth, believing that the prophecy was a distant hope, a dream that might never come to pass. But now, standing in the ruins of the temple, she understood that the prophecy had never been about destiny alone. It had been about choice, about the will to rise from the ashes of the past and forge a new future. The kingdom of Eldoria had been broken, its people scattered, its power lost to time. But now, with the heir of Eldoria once more among them, the world had changed. The ruins of Ardenthal would not remain in darkness forever. The people of Eldoria would rise again, and the bloodline that had once been lost would be remembered. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden light upon the ruins, Elyria knew that the journey was not over. The kingdom still needed to be rebuilt. Its people still needed to be united. But for the first time in centuries, there was hope. The lost royalty had not been forgotten. They had been found, and with them, the future of Eldoria had been reclaimed. The legacy of the lost. As the sun rose over the ruins of Eldoria, casting its golden light upon the land, a new chapter of history was about to begin. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the lost bloodline had been found, and the kingdom that had once fallen into ruin now stood at the threshold of renewal. Yet, even as the world of Eldoria began to heal, the echoes of its past lingered, whispering through the wind and etched into the very stones of the land. The story of the lost royalty had not ended. It had merely transformed, becoming a legend that would be passed down through generations. Elyria stood at the heart of the temple, the weight of the prophecy still pressing upon her. She had not merely uncovered a forgotten truth, she had become a part of it, a living testament to the resilience of Eldoria's people. The journey she had undertaken had changed her, shaping her into more than just the heir of a fallen kingdom. She had become a symbol of hope, a beacon of renewal in a world that had long been shrouded in shadow. Kaelin, Mira, and Lyrian had stood beside her through the trials of their journey, each of them playing a vital role in the restoration of Eldoria. Their strength, wisdom, and unwavering belief in the prophecy had carried them through the darkness, ensuring that the kingdom would not remain lost forever. They had not merely fought for the past, they had fought for the future, proving that even the most broken of legacies could be reclaimed. And yet, as the ruins of the temple stood in solemn silence, a question lingered in the air. Would the legacy of the lost royalty be remembered, or would it fade once more into the annals of history? Elyria knew that the answer would not be found in the past, but in the choices of those who came after her. The prophecy had spoken of the return of the heir, of the restoration of Eldoria's power, but it had not spoken of what would come next. That was the burden of the present, the responsibility of those who now stood at the precipice of a new era. The wind carried the scent of old stone and the echoes of forgotten songs, a reminder that the past had not been erased, only waiting to be remembered. The lost royalty had not been forgotten, but had instead been found, their legacy carried forward by those who had dared to believe in the prophecy. And as the sun rose over the land, casting its light upon the ruins, Elyria knew that the story of Eldoria was far from over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be written by those who had the courage to stand against the darkness and reclaim the future. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.